again. I am very happy to have been invited to present this award to the Government of Australia. Australia is a world leader for its work to develop capacities of displaced people with disabilities so they can lead full lives. AusAid, its overseas aid program, is doing cutting-edge work on this issue. It is a key partner for the Women's Refugee Commission. Australia is one of the 130 countries that have ratified the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which became law in 2008. AusAid's Development for All program is making sure the convention becomes a reality. AusAid's vision is to provide opportunities for displaced persons with disabilities to become educated, healthier, and be able to work. It believes all should be able to join religious, cultural, and social activities that create a sense of belonging. His Excellency, Mr. Gary Quinlan, Australia's ambassador to the United Nations, is personally committed to refugees, asylum seekers, and citizens with disabilities. It is very fitting that he is accepting this award on behalf of the Government of Australia. For the dedication of the Government of Australia to the displaced people with disabilities, I am very pleased to present His Excellency, Mr. Gary Quinlan, with this 2013 Voices of Courage Award.
There are a lot of very distinguished people here today and a lot of people who do a great deal more than I do every day to actually help people's lives out on the ground. So I want to honour everybody here today who, of course, is part of that great project. I do want to recognise Sarah and fellow colleagues, ambassadors from the United Nations who are here. George Rupp, of course, and I wish you well as you transition from here in September, and everybody else, NGOs, members of the UN family, but also each individual. On behalf of the Government of Australia, frankly, I have to say, as a government representative, I feel quite humbled to be accepting the award in the presence of three outstanding, extraordinary individuals, Dahabo, Sandra and Caroline. Obviously, you don't need me to say these are extraordinary individuals who've overcome the most significant problems and challenges, but I know we're all immensely impressed by that. I also want to recognise Catherine O'Neill as the founder of this wonderful organisation. One thing I might just say nationally about my own country before I just mention the development angle here is disability issues are really genuinely an extraordinarily live issue in Australia. Overnight, an agreement was reached among all our political parties on the funding of a new national disability insurance scheme. We have budget problems like everybody else, so the way we're funding this, and this has been agreed by all political parties, is an additional tax on Australians. Each Australian will now pay an additional $364 per year in addition to the medical tax levy of 1.5% of our income, which we've been paying for 30 years, of course. We will be paying an additional 0.5% in order to fund disability insurance. This is how vital the issue of disabilities and challenges in Australia is, and there's no dispute about that. All political parties, the country, are delighted to pay an extra tax when they believe it's going to do something which needs to be done and which all Australians are committed to. There are three reasons I'd single out why I think we're quite passionate in our development program overseas about disability. One, of course, is we simply recognise you cannot eradicate extreme poverty without, in fact, also providing for the 1 in 8 people in developing countries, but more broadly across the world, who suffer from a disability. I was shocked when I learned that figure, I have to say. I helped launch the World Disability Report 2 years ago in New York. Two things surprised me about that. One was that it was the first World Disability Report and the implications for development as well as national policy. I just assumed that these sorts of reports by the World Bank and others had been done for years. They hadn't. First one, 2 years ago. The second thing was that figure, 1 in 8. And I should have known. I know I should have known, but I didn't. And I was surprised to learn that figure, and it's stuck with me ever since. The second reason we're so passionate, it's a basic human right, and none of our human rights can be diminished or exempted, but if we don't look after the human rights of people who have the most challenge to the recognition and realization of their human rights, then it decreases the human rights of all of us, and we need to always bear that in mind. And thirdly, of course, in economic terms, simple economic terms, working through development programs with people who suffer from disabilities is good economics. It's the way, in fact, to promote growth, inclusive growth, but real growth across these societies. I'll say a quick word about conflict. Australia is a member of the Security Council. We were elected for a 2-year term, a non-permanent seat earlier this year. The business of the Council is conflict and, in theory, trying to resolve it. But we do our best in a number of areas, but I'll come to Syria in a moment. As we know, more than 6 million people of the 43 million people displaced by conflict have a disability. That's a very, very powerful figure, and they're the most vulnerable in situations which are already totally catastrophic for most people. And we're not just talking about Syria, we're talking about Blue Nile, South Kordofan. In Sudan, we're talking about the Central African Republic, which is now descending into a terrible humanitarian crisis. We're talking about continuing problems in the DRC, we're talking about Mali, we're talking about so many places. And how we meet the needs of these people in crisis, of course, but through development programs, reflects on all of us. In relation to Syria, I'll just say a couple of words because we are in a situation of genuine catastrophe. It is accelerating. It is the worst humanitarian crisis we currently face if you just look at the numbers, but the acceleration of the effects regionally and beyond Syria itself as a nation are now becoming, as I say, far too catastrophic for us to continue to evade our responsibility to do something about it. The humanitarian crisis, I'm sure you're familiar with the dimensions. Internally in Syria, we have something like 7 million people displaced, over half of them children, 1/3 of the housing totally wiped out, gone, bang. 60% of the hospitals, gone. 30% of the schools, gone. So this is just basic measures internally within Syria. We have 1.4 million refugees in Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey, but they're formally registered refugees. There are many, many, many hundreds of thousands more who are living with families. These are Syrians living with families in Jordan, living in the community, living in Lebanon. 1 in 4 people living in Lebanon, 1 in 4 are Syrian. 1 in 5 people living in Jordan are Syrian. 3,000 refugees a night into Jordan and Syria in January. 5,000 a night in February. 8,000 a night in March. And more today. 400,000 refugees of the 1.4 million, and that's just the formally registered refugees, have been generated over the last 3 months. We are, in fact, approaching a situation where the system you contribute to, the international global humanitarian system, will collapse. We simply will not be able to cope. Countries are, in fact, the immediately affected countries in the neighbourhood are suffering profoundly and are now coming to people like the Security Council and saying, this is existential, something has to be done. I've come from a debate behind closed doors, private debate of course, but I'll tell you about it this morning in the Security Council, about whether the Council should visit Jordan and then Lebanon and Turkey, and see for ourselves what the dimensions of a humanitarian crisis is, and how that humanitarian crisis in itself is now generating a far greater regional crisis which will be a threat to international peace and security. And we haven't been able to agree. We'll continue the discussions. 13 countries agreed, and we'll continue to work on whether we should proceed with a visit, but how could we not visit the region? Anyway, this is the politics we still need to overcome and do more about it. On Syria, I'll say only one other thing, and that is that about 80% of people who are fleeing from Syria, over half of those, of course, are women and girls, over half children, and who present with a disability, of course, are newly disabled. And as the violence increases, and it's becoming more and more nasty and violent, this will accelerate. It's becoming exponential in the impact, not incremental. We're past the incremental phase. We're now in an exponential descent into further catastrophe. And I'd like to publicly acknowledge the tremendous generosity of the governments of Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey for what they are accommodating. And also the UN system, which is often, it's always imperfect, I'm imperfect for heaven's sake, everything is imperfect, but the UN system, the NGO system, the international system generally, and organisations like your own for what they are doing and struggling against in what is really becoming seriously out of control. In relation to this organisation, your capacity in what you do is priceless. Events like today, I was saying to Sarah, really are indispensable. Raise some money, get together, mobilise people, but also recognise achievement, people who have done things which are extraordinary, which motivates all the rest of us and should, but also self-recognition for every person who is here today because you care. So thank you very much on behalf of the Government of Australia for that, and we must all continue to support you. Thank you.